After the Beatles broke apart, Paul McCartney faced a challenge that few musicians could have imagined. Everything he did was inevitably measured against the extraordinary standard of his former band, and his decision to build a new group with Linda McCartney only gave critics another reason to question his direction. Wings did not arrive fully formed. Their first album, Wildlife, was recorded quickly and received a lukewarm response, with some critics questioning whether McCartney had lost the creative spark that had made him one of the most successful songwriters of his generation. But McCartney was never interested in simply recreating the Beatles. He wanted to start again, experiment, and discover what Wings could become. By 1972, that process was beginning to pay off. One of the songs that captured this change was Hi, 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 a straightforward, energetic rocker that showed McCartney reconnecting with the rawer side of his musical personality. Unlike the softer material that had dominated some of his early post-Beatles work, the song was built around a driving rhythm, infectious hooks, and an unmistakable rock and roll attitude. McCartney and Linda wrote the song while Wings were in Spain. Rather than approaching it as an elaborate studio composition, McCartney had something much simpler in mind. He wanted a song that could work at the end of the band's live set, a direct, uncomplicated rocker that would give the audience something to sing and move along to. As McCartney later explained, the song had been written partly with their live performances in mind. It went down well when Wings toured Europe, convincing him that it could work as a single, and McCartney's opinion of the song was unusually strong. Reflecting on Hi, 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 he said, "I think it's the best single we've done as Wings." That distinction matters. McCartney wasn't necessarily claiming that Hi, Hi, Hi was the greatest Wings song ever written. He was calling it the best single Wings had made, a much more specific statement, but one that makes the song's place in the band's history particularly interesting. The song also had an element of controversy that McCartney was more than happy to embrace. Hi, Hi, Hi was released in December 1972 as a double A-side with Sea Moon. Its suggestive lyrics attracted the attention of the BBC, which banned the record from airplay. McCartney later argued that the broadcaster had misunderstood some of the lyrics, although he acknowledged that the song had a deliberately sensual quality. McCartney recalled being in what he described as a sensuous mood when he wrote it in Spain. The song's sexual undertones were therefore not entirely accidental, but musically, the track was deliberately uncomplicated. McCartney later described it as a rock and roll song, built around only a few chords, designed to provide Wings with something different from the rest of their material. That simplicity is part of what makes Hi, Hi, Hi so effective. There is no attempt to recreate the sophistication of Sgt. Pepper or the emotional intimacy of Yesterday. Instead, McCartney returns to the basic ingredients that had always made rock and roll work: rhythm, repetition, attitude, and a melody that immediately sticks. It was also an important moment for Wings. The group was still finding its identity, and McCartney was still proving that his post-Beatles career could stand on its own. Hi, Hi, Hi demonstrated that he could write something that felt immediate and exciting without relying on the reputation of his former band. The single reached number 5 in the UK, despite the BBC ban, and became one of the notable early successes of Wings. But the song's reputation grew even further through Wings' live performances. Years later, Hi, Hi, Hi became part of the band's energetic concert repertoire, including a celebrated performance featured on Wings Over America. The live version revealed another side of the song, louder, faster, and more aggressive than its studio counterpart. By then, Wings had transformed from a band that critics were unsure about into one of the biggest touring groups in the world. That transformation makes McCartney's praise for Hi, Hi, Hi particularly revealing. Today, when people think of Wings, songs such as Band on the Run, Jet, Live and Let Die, or Maybe I'm Amazed may come to mind first. Yet McCartney himself singled out Hi, Hi, Hi when asked about the band's singles. Perhaps that's because the song represents something more fundamental than commercial success. It represents McCartney remembering that he could still make a great rock and roll record simply because it was fun. Hi, Hi, Hi was not designed to be profound. It wasn't trying to prove that McCartney could outdo the Beatles. It was a song built for the stage, written to get a reaction, and shaped around the kind of hook that had been part of McCartney's musical vocabulary for decades. And in the middle of Wings' uncertain early years, that may have been exactly what the band needed. For Paul McCartney, Hi 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 wasn't simply another Wings single. It was the record he believed represented the group at its best as a single-making band. That makes his verdict all the more interesting. Among the many celebrated songs Wings would eventually release, McCartney once looked back at this provocative little rocker from 1972 and called it the best single Wings had ever done.